Thank you to Luke for that fantastic presentation about how Rambler Scotland have really mobilised a crowd across all ages to solve a problem that they probably couldn't have hoped to have tackled themselves, which is really the power of citizen science and community engagement. What I'm going to do to wrap up this entire session, we've had 3 tracks on varying amount of community engagement, either surfacing material or mobilising crowds or giving people the skills, maybe in the schools environment, to go out and do citizen science. But some disclaimers. I've got some tips, but all projects are different. Not all of these tips will fit your project, but the more that you hear, the more there is for you to try, the more for you to keep in mind. Some of it will work, some of it less so. The order of the advice has no bearing on a ranking, it's just how it fell into my head and a logical way for me to try and narrate through this. I am by no means an expert. I have some experience of running citizen science projects, both with Esri and my previous life, designing apps, but I'm not really an expert. I'm not publishing papers on this stuff. I will reference some people who are experts, and they do publish papers, and you can look them up in your own time. So this is really just how I see it. It's also from listening to Luke and Rosie and stealing stuff from their presentations, or reinforcing what I thought I knew. So tip number 1, first thing you've got to really work out is citizen science the correct solution for your problem? Not every project is right for citizen science or community engagement. And really, I think that's because in a community engagement project, things have to be quite tight in terms of the ask that you're going to have for the citizens. It can't be rambling, it can't be sort of subjective, it has to be fairly tight. It has to also be quite simple. Complex problems there is a way to do it, but you've got an informed crowd rather than a general sort of citizen science approach. So a simplistic problem with a clearly defined ask will probably yield more successful results. But also, your project has to spark some interest in that crowd. Otherwise, you're not going to get a crowd. Now, if you look at Luke's presentation, people who use the countryside are quite fanatical about the countryside. That's where they spend their leisure time, and when they're working behind their desk, they're thinking about where they're going to go. If they've got access to ArcGIS Online, they can actually look at where they're going to go whilst they're at their desk, but less about that. But it sparks that interest. They're invested in the thing that Rambler Scotland are talking about and asking them for help. And Luke actually mentioned this directly in his presentation. Sometimes you have to change your project to fit with the spark of interest for your community, and actually what you want will fall out of the sight. If you focus just on what you want, it might not nail the community interest element, at which point your crowd doesn't really come along, because they're just asking us to do their work for them. So you've got to get it right, and it's definitely a balance. Don't start my watch. Tip number 2. What resources do you have available in your organisation? So citizen science has been around for 10, 15 years. It's been around a lot longer than that, with things like the SETI screensaver, where you remember the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and you could have it on your desktop. I mean, that was citizen science to some extent. But it requires time, careful planning, and it'll take probably longer than you think to get your project up and running. And people for a long time thought it was just a cheap way to shortcut labour. If we don't need to employ loads of surveyors, we'll get the citizens to do it. It's not actually all that cheap. You have to invest in it, and that's time and probably staffing, which collectively is money. But staffing, who's going to keep that project going? Who's going to answer the questions? Who's going to do the calls? Who's going to make sure that the app is up to date? Who's going to make sure that the dashboard's not falling over? Who's going to liaise with the partners? All of these things need to be somebody's job, rather than just, can you fit it in when you're not doing anything else? Because projects don't really go very well if that's how they're approached. And there's also the knowledge question. What knowledge do you have about engaging with citizens in your organisation? Now, everybody has to start somewhere. We all start somewhere with absolutely everything that we do, and we slowly, hopefully, become competent, experts, who knows. But maybe the best way is to engage in somebody else's citizen science project first. So Confession, I have signed up to Rambler Scotland, but so far I haven't done anything, and I noticed when I went onto their website there's a lot of paths near me that need validated. Maybe there are some paths that haven't been mapped, so I need to invest some time. But maybe if you want to get started and your organisation is low in knowledge and skills, find somebody else's project, sign up to it, have a look at the messaging that's coming out, critique it, be involved, and then think what yours looks like. So sort of piggybacking. So tip 3. What level of citizen engagement do you actually want? Well, wait a minute. I thought citizen science was just a thing. Now you're saying there are levels. Well, of course there are levels. There's complexity. And I have stolen this graphic from Mookie Hackley, who's a professor of extreme citizen science at UCL. And he broke it down into 4 levels, increasing complexity. Level 1 is just using citizens as sensors, crowdsourcing essentially. Level 2, you're maybe asking them a subjective question. It's the health of that tree. Is it in good health, poor health? Document your answer with some evidence. A little bit more subjective. To a level 4, extreme citizen science, where it's collaborative science. The citizens are involved in defining the ask, they're involved in the data collection, and they're involved in the data analysis. And if it's a cyclical project, they inform the second time round. Mookie's stuff is amazing. He does this with people that can't read and write on mobile phones, using pictures and the international unit of length of a football pitch. How far away were the poachers? How far away were the forestry workers in terms of football pitches? Turns out that's a fairly universal metric. But go and have a look at his blog and decide what level you want to come in at. Probably 1 and 2, I would say. Co-design. Now Luke talks about this as well. Do you start with co-design? Sounds like a really good idea. Sounds like it might get a bit messy, a bit complicated. Wouldn't it be easier just to do what we know that we need to do, just get on with it? Sure, we're right. Well, you could be lucky and nail it, but sometimes you don't. And actually, if you do a little bit of co-design with a small group of users, then you can create buy-in with your stakeholders. It can also give you an additional perspective. I've done it myself when I lived in former life of working for Adina, University of Edinburgh, and we designed an app, and we thought this app was to collect data in the field. It's Survey123, 5 years before Survey123. Not bragging. But it was really good. And we took it around to speak to some people, and somebody said, this will transform the field for those students that can't access the field for whatever reason. We kind of went, what are you talking about? And it turned out that we had missed the accessibility angle that this app could open up. And after that conversation with an academic, it became central to our design process to include that utility where we could have live updates from the field and a dashboard where somebody who wasn't able to access the field could then communicate with the people in the field and inform them on what they should be looking at next in the field. It was two-way communication. We were blind to it, and we only got that through stakeholder engagement. But the considerations, if you ask everybody what they want, they'll tell you, 100 different things, at which point it becomes a mess. Nobody's happy, you're confused, and you make a terrible app, which is too complicated. Small group of informed people. And you can ask people like Luke how they identified key individuals and organizations to help them iteratively design their app. Number 5, halfway. What environment will the app be deployed in? This is really obvious, isn't it? Kind of, but you can again make some assumptions. Data connection. Are you going to be deploying the app into somewhere that looks like the image at the top? You can see there's a river, it looks quite dangerous, it's quite a temporally short thing, it's a flood. There's some houses, there's probably 3G at least, I'll be able to have a web browser. Not so much in the Alpine image, there's probably no data signal there at all. I will be looking for something that can work off the grid. Do I want to package data into my app? In the validation of paths, sometimes you might want to have people go out and check things. If you've got asset surveys which already exist and you want validation, you want to package the data in. So you need to get data onto the app. So a web app might not work as well. Will it be a web app or will it be a native? So something that you download from a store and then you have an implementation. So that can create a sort of bounce off for citizens where we've all done it. When something asks us to download something onto our phone and we don't quite understand what it is, there's a bit of a hesitation of, will I do this? So that bounce off can really impact the number of citizens that you take on your engagement. Do you want anonymous access or authenticated access? Does everybody know what I mean there? So ease of access, make it public, anybody can do anything with it, but people can do bad things with it. So then you have to think about how quickly that data flows into a dashboard and becomes public on your branded website, or if it needs to be validated, every single record, before you can make it public. Because there are weird people out there that seem to have too much time and access to the internet. But adding in authentication doesn't need to be complicated. So Luke answered in the question session that they use Hub, and they have these community users, which gives them just enough ArcGIS juice to get authenticated access. You can actually tie it to your socials, so they don't need to create a new account. They can log in with their social media accounts as well. That brings me neatly on to one of the only slides which has anything ArcGIS-y, but don't tell too many people. But you'll have seen these apps should be familiar to you. They're the main suspects in doing community or citizen science, I would say, from the ArcGIS system at the moment. Survey123 history lesson. It was a little pet project of a developer in the States, and then I think Deepwater Horizon blew up in the Gulf of Mexico. And somebody came over and said, that project you're working on would be really good for sort of collecting information on where oil's coming ashore, where there's birds with oil. How quickly can you get it ready? And the answer was, well, if you give me lots of engineers really quickly. And it turned out to be a really good idea, and it is a fantastic app. Quick capture, yeah, field maps, amazing, it's got tracker in it. You can also build your own. You can use the dev tools. If you want it to do just one thing, you can build your own. But obviously that requires quite a lot of time, effort, and skill, and it won't be automatically updated. The stack will, but the app itself won't. Your feedback. You can see the Twitter feeds. Everything is in one place. I mean, it's one of the better ArcGIS names because it's the hub, it's the thing in the middle, it's what brings everybody in for that reason. There's some excellent examples. I do suggest that you go and have a look at Voices of the Victorian Poor and the Ramblers for Scotland hub sites, because they are amazing. And you have to reflect. I mean, you can't just apply and forget. You're unlikely to get it right the first time. I helped a team at the University of Dundee years ago do some citizen science, and the operatives were abroad and in refugee camps, and it was difficult because we were designing it, co-designing it in different time zones in different continents, and I just used colours. So it's like if you're not looking at the yellow one, you're not looking at the right one. So the app is now yellow. Send me your feedback. They open it up and the app's green. They're on the wrong one. Color, obviously there's colorblind as well, but it was the best I could do. Ask and expect for feedback throughout the project and respond positively to the feedback, and be humble. You won't get it right. Somebody will point out something which is really obvious after you've done something. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but always be humble. I remember sitting with developers and we used to set up baby monitors and cameras whilst we were doing user testing. And the designer is like, why aren't they just hitting the button? And I'm like, maybe the button needs to be red. They're like, yeah, whatever. And flashing, like perhaps flashing. They couldn't see this gorgeous button that they had designed. And they then realized that the design was part of the problem. But they were very humble when they actually saw these people struggle. Communicate your progress as well. I think Luke said, you know, it's unlikely that you'll ever finish that project because it's huge, but you've made a great start and you're continuing. Every single validation takes them closer to the finish, if they ever get there. And a simple thank you can mean a lot. It's, you know, when you finish a form, it says, If it doesn't say thanks, maybe submit another one, or you get some feedback, you disenfranchise yourself from the process. And Luke's mentioned it again, 80-20. Not everybody will do the same things, and 20% of the people do 80% of the task. Fail fast. Well, quickly identify failures by releasing early, almost prototypes, to a small group of people that you kind of trust not to be too nasty, give you some constructive criticism and feedback so as you can improve it quickly. That will save you time and money. It's super frustrating when people go, yeah, I can't show you quite yet, it's not quite ready, I just need to, and you're looking at the time, it's going on and on and on. And then keep it simple. If it looks like there's a simple implementation that will get you to the solution, go with it. It's probably the right one. Okay, there's a fancier, more complicated thing that you could use, but if you don't need to use it, don't use it. So if you're thinking, I could do field maps, I'll probably do it. They do points, lines, and polygons in Survey123. Maybe I'll use that. Just use the easiest one. Don't make your life more complicated than it. And then a summary slide of all of the things I've talked about in the last 15 minutes or so. Is it right for you, citizen science? Make sure that you're resourced correctly, get the level of engagement correct, and that's correct for you and the experience in your organization. Co-design where possible because it is beneficial, even if it is a bit of a pain. Think about the deployment environment before you select the right app. Communicate effectively throughout. Reflect, fail fast, keep it simple, and you will have a successful citizen science project. Thank you.